I'm Eliza. 3 months before my wedding, my mother and sister destroyed my grandmother's antique wedding gown that was promised to me, then locked me out of our family home and froze my accounts. They said I wasn't worthy of carrying on our family's legacy. But what they didn't realize was that in burning that dress, they ignited something in me they couldn't extinguish, a determination to uncover the truth about our family's darkest secrets and reclaim what was rightfully mine. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The handcrafted invitation to my own wedding planning session felt oddly formal in my hands as I approached my mother's Victorian home in Newport. The envelope was cream-colored with gold filigree, my mother's trademark touch, elegant but imposing. Miranda Thornhill never did anything casually, especially when it came to maintaining the family's carefully curated image. I parked my weathered Honda Civic between my sister Vivian's gleaming BMW and my mother's vintage Jaguar, feeling the familiar pang of inadequacy that always accompanied family gatherings. Taking a deep breath, I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, my grandmother Eleonora's sapphire earrings catching the afternoon light, a small act of rebellion against the understated pearls my mother would inevitably be wearing. The heavy oak door swung open before I could even knock. My mother stood in the doorway, her silver-streaked auburn hair swept into a perfect chignon, lips pressed into what passed for a smile in the Thornhill household. "Eliza, you're 7 minutes late," she said, checking her watch. "Vivian and the wedding planner have already begun discussing floral arrangements." "Sorry, Mother. The hospital shift ran long. We had an emergency with a pediatric patient," I explained, stepping into the foyer that smelled of lemon polish and old money. My mother's eyes narrowed slightly. "I still don't understand why you insist on working those exhausting nurse shifts when you're about to marry into the Hamilton family. Richard's father is on the hospital board, for heaven's sake." I bit back the response I wanted to give, that I loved my work in pediatric nursing, that it gave me purpose beyond the suffocating expectations of Newport society. Instead, I followed her through the marble hallway to the sunroom where my sister Vivian was flipping through a portfolio of wedding venues, her manicured fingernails tapping impatiently against the glossy pages. "Finally," Vivian said without looking up. "We were about to decide everything without you, though Mother has final approval, of course." The wedding planner, a nervous woman named Harriet with an iPad and too many silver bangles, smiled apologetically at me. "We were just discussing the Kai Rosecliff Ballroom versus the Ocean Lawn at the Breakers for the reception." "Actually," I said, sitting down and accepting the tea my mother's housekeeper silently offered, "Richard and I were thinking of something more intimate. Maybe the garden at Grandmother Eleonora's cottage on the cliffs?" The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with the silver letter opener on my mother's desk. Vivian's perfectly shaped eyebrows shot up while my mother set down her teacup with deliberate precision. "Eliza, darling," my mother said in the tone she reserved for correcting social faux pas, "the Hamiltons have connections throughout New England. Richard's father expects a certain standard. The cottage simply won't accommodate the guest list." "We don't need 500 people watching us exchange vows, Mother," I countered, feeling Richard's absence acutely. He'd been called to London for an emergency business meeting, leaving me to face the Thornhill women alone. "And I'd like to wear Grandmother's dress, the one she promised me." My mother's face went completely still, the way it did when she was truly displeased. Vivian let out a small, derisive laugh. "That old thing. It's practically falling apart, Eliza." "Besides," she added, leaning forward with practiced concern, "do you really think you've earned it?" "Earned it?" I repeated, feeling the first flickers of anger warming my cheeks. "It was Grandmother's wish that I have it. She told me so before she died." Eleonora said many things in her final days. My mother interjected smoothly. "She wasn't always lucid." That dress represents generations of Thornhill women who made substantial contributions to this family's legacy. Your grandmother was a pioneering female surgeon when women weren't welcome in operating rooms. Your great-grandmother established the Thornhill Foundation that still funds arts education across New England. She paused, her eyes coolly assessing me. And what have you done, Eliza? Change bedpans and marry well? The words stung like a slap. I set my teacup down with shaking hands, tea spilling onto the antique saucer. Grandmother valued compassion above status. She told me stories about helping poorer patients who couldn't afford care. That's the legacy I'm trying to honor. How charmingly naive, Vivian murmured, exchanging a knowing look with our mother. Mother, perhaps we should show her the Hamilton wedding portfolio. Clarissa Hamilton has already selected several designer options that would be much more appropriate for Richard's bride. The wedding planner squirmed uncomfortably as the conversation continued around me, as though I wasn't even present. They discussed color schemes, guest lists, and menu options while I sat there, feeling increasingly like a prop in my own wedding rather than its bride. I want grandmother's dress, I finally stated firmly, interrupting their discussion of lobster versus filet mignon. It's what she wanted. It's what I want. My mother set down her pen and regarded me with the same expression she'd worn when I announced I was attending nursing school instead of Dartmouth. Well, we'll see, won't we? She said with chilling finality. The dress requires significant restoration. It may not be salvageable. Later that evening, alone in my apartment, I called Richard, desperate to hear a supportive voice. The call went to voicemail for the third time that day. I stared at the framed photo of my grandmother and me on my nightstand. She was wearing her doctor's coat, arm around 12-year-old me in my Halloween nurse costume, both of us beaming. She'd slipped her sapphire ring off that day and pressed it into my palm, whispering, "Remember, Eliza, true worth isn't inherited. It's earned through how you care for others." With renewed determination, I opened my laptop and drafted an email to my mother's housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, who had worked for our family since before I was born. If anyone knew where grandmother's dress was being kept, it would be her. Within minutes, she responded, "Third floor cedar closet, behind your mother's winter coats. The key is in the Chinese jewelry box on the vanity. Come tomorrow afternoon. She has a foundation meeting downtown." I felt a twinge of guilt at the subterfuge, but it was quickly overshadowed by conviction. That dress belonged to me, not as a Thornhill heirloom, but as a promise from the one person who had truly seen and accepted me. Little did I know that my simple quest to claim what was rightfully mine would unravel secrets our family had buried for generations. Secrets that would cost me everything before I was done. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The Thornhill estate loomed against the steel-gray Newport sky as I approached it the next afternoon. Rain clouds gathered on the horizon, matching my mood as I parked down the street rather than in the circular driveway. I couldn't risk Mrs. Chen getting in trouble if another staff member noticed my car. I circled to the service entrance at the back of the house, the path bordered by meticulously trimmed topiary, another one of my mother's obsessions. Everything in our family had to appear perfectly controlled, just like the sculpted shrubs that never dared grow an inch out of place. Mrs. Chen opened the door before I could knock, her lined face a mixture of conspiracy and concern. At 67, she'd been with our family long enough to have witnessed 3 generations of Thornhill women and their carefully guarded secrets. "Miss Eliza," she whispered, ushering me inside. "Quick, quick. Mrs. Thornhill called 10 minutes ago. The foundation meeting ended early. She's stopping at the club, but will be home within the hour." My heart hammered against my ribs as I followed Mrs. Chen through the warren of service corridors that connected the kitchen to the main house. The smell of furniture polish mingled with something baking, probably tomorrow's dinner party dessert. "Have you seen the dress recently?" I asked as we climbed the narrow back staircase that servants had used for generations. Mrs. Chen nodded. "Last week, your mother had the preservation specialist come look at it. They were discussing restoration options." She hesitated at the second floor landing. "But there was something strange. The specialist left looking unsettled. Your mother made a phone call immediately after." That didn't bode well. My mother only made immediate phone calls when she was covering something up or initiating a plan. The third floor of the Thornhill house had always been my favorite, less formal than the entertaining spaces below, with sloped ceilings and dormer windows that made it feel like a sanctuary. This was where grandmother Eleonora had maintained her private study after retiring from medicine, where she'd taught me to play chess and told me stories about her early days breaking barriers in the surgical field. Mrs. Chen led me to the cedar closet tucked under the eaves. "The key," she said, producing a small brass key from her pocket. "I already took it from the jewelry box. Hurry now." With trembling fingers, I unlocked the cedar closet. The familiar scent of preserved wood and mothballs washed over me as I pushed aside my mother's meticulously organized winter coats, reaching toward the back where heirloom garments were stored in archival boxes. The box that should have contained my grandmother's wedding dress was there, alabaster white with gold trim, the Thornhill family crest embossed on the lid. But when I lifted it down and opened it, the dress was gone. "It's not here," I whispered, panic rising in my throat. "Mrs. Chen, it's not here." The housekeeper's eyes widened. "Impossible. I saw it myself last week." She moved closer, peering into the empty box. "Wait, there's a note." Nestled in the acid-free tissue paper was a cream-colored card, my mother's personal stationery. Written in her precise, elegant script were just a few words. "In restoration. For the right Thornhill. Bride, someday." Cold anger replaced my initial shock. This was classic Miranda Thornhill passive aggression. The note wasn't meant for the preservation specialist or anyone else. It was meant for me, because my mother had known I would come looking. "I need to see Vivian," I said suddenly. "Is she home?" Mrs. Chen nodded. "In the conservatory, arranging flowers for tonight's dinner party." Vivian and I had once been close, in the years before she fully absorbed our mother's value system, when we'd still hide in the attic during stuffy Newport galas and make up stories about running away to live normal lives. But money and status had seduced her completely by the time she turned 18. Now, at 32, she was our mother's perfect protégée, having married the heir to a banking fortune and dedicated herself to climbing the social ladder with ruthless precision. I found her exactly where Mrs. Chen had indicated, elegant fingers, arranging white peonies and silver-dollar eucalyptus in a crystal vase. She didn't look up when I entered. "Mother will be home in 20 minutes, she said flatly. "If you're here to steal family heirlooms, you should hurry." So she knew. Of course she did. "Where's grandmother's dress, Vivian?" She snipped a stem, with silver shears, placing a peony in the exact center of the arrangement. "Safe from your middle-class wedding fantasies." "It was promised to me," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. Vivian finally looked up, her eyes, the same hazel as mine, calculating and cold. "Do you know why Mother doesn't think you deserve it? It's not just your career choice or your insistence on living in that apartment in the unfashionable part of town." She set down her shears and brushed an invisible speck from her cream cashmere sweater. "It's because you remind her too much of grandmother. The same righteousness, the same inability to understand how the world really works. Eleonora nearly ruined this family with her principles. Mother spent decades rebuilding what she destroyed." "What are you talking about?" I asked, genuinely confused. Our grandmother had been revered in medical circles and Newport society alike. Vivian's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. Ask her about the foundation audit of 1992. Ask her about why grandfather really left. But don't come in here acting entitled to family history you know nothing about. Before I could respond, the distant sound of the front door opening echoed through the house. My mother's crisp voice called out to someone, probably the day butler. "You should go," Vivian said, returning to her flower arrangement. "Unless you want another lecture about family loyalty and your many disappointments." I backed away, mind reeling. What had happened in 1992? What did my grandmother supposedly do that had threatened our family? And most importantly, where was her wedding dress now? As I slipped out through the service entrance, Mrs. Chen pressed a small object into my hand. "Your grandmother asked me to give you this if things ever became difficult. I've kept it safe all these years, waiting." It was a small silver key, unlike any I recognized from the house. "What does it open?" I whispered. The elderly housekeeper shook her head. "I don't know. She just said you would understand when the time came." She glanced nervously over her shoulder. "Now go, before she finds you here." As I drove away from the estate, the first fat raindrops began to fall. The silver key felt impossibly heavy in my pocket, another mystery in a day already overflowing with questions. Whatever game my mother and sister were playing, it was clearly more complex than I had initially thought. And somewhere in Newport, my grandmother's wedding dress, my dress, was hidden from me. But not for long. Not if I had anything to say about it. The silver key burned in my pocket as I drove through the rain-slicked streets of Newport, past mansions that had watched over generations of secrets just like ours. I had no idea what had opened, but one place kept tugging at my thoughts. Grandmother Eleonora's cliffside cottage. Unlike the intimidating grandeur of the main Thornhill estate, the cottage had always been grandmother's sanctuary. A modest cape, cod with weathered gray shingles and a wraparound porch facing the Atlantic, it sat on a small promontory of land that had been in our family for generations. While my mother had inherited the main estate and the family fortune, grandmother had specifically left the cottage to me in her will, a fact that Miranda Thornhill never failed to mention with thinly veiled disdain. "Such a modest inheritance," she'd said at the reading of the will. "But I suppose it suits your modest ambitions." I hadn't been to the cottage in months. After grandmother's death 2 years ago, I'd found it too painful to visit, each room too full of her absence. Now the thought of it called to me like a lighthouse in a storm. By the time I pulled into the gravel driveway, the rain had intensified into sheets that obscured the ocean view. I made a dash for the covered porch, fumbling with the main door, key that I always kept on my keychain. Inside, the cottage smelled of disuse and sea air, musty but not unpleasant, like an old book waiting to be opened again. I flipped on lights as I moved through the small living room with its faded blue, sofas and watercolor seascapes. Everything was exactly as grandmother had left it. Her reading glasses still on the side table, a medical journal open and face down beside them, preserved in time like a museum to her life. "What am I looking for?" I whispered to the empty house, rolling the silver key between my fingers. It was smaller than a typical door key, more delicate, perhaps for a jewelry box or a desk drawer. I moved to grandmother's study, a small room overlooking the churning gray ocean, its walls lined with medical texts and classic literature. Her massive oak desk dominated the space, its surface arranged with the precision of a surgeon. Fountain pens aligned, papers stacked neatly, a magnifying glass positioned just so. I tried the silver key in the desk drawers, but it didn't fit. Any of them. Frustrated, I sank into her leather chair, closing my eyes and trying to think like her. Where would Eleonora Thornhill hide something important? Something she didn't want Miranda or Vivian to find? A memory surfaced. Grandmother showing me a secret compartment in an antique jewelry box when I was 12. The best hiding places, Eliza, she'd said with a conspiratorial smile, are the ones hiding in plain sight. My eyes snapped open and swept across the room. There, on the bookshelf behind the desk, sat a weathered wooden box I'd always assumed held old photographs. I'd never opened it, respecting her privacy even after her death. I retrieved the box and set it on the desk. It was heavier than I expected, made of dark walnut with delicate inlaid mother-of-pearl around the edges. A small keyhole was barely visible on its front face. With trembling fingers, I inserted the silver key. It slid in perfectly, and the lock turned with a satisfying click. Inside the box lay a collection of items that made my breath catch: a leather-bound journal with my grandmother's initials embossed in gold, a manila envelope, several black and white photographs, and nestled beneath them all, a small velvet pouch. I opened the journal first, recognizing grandmother's precise handwriting. It appeared to be a personal record, dating back to 1990. I flipped through the pages, my eyes catching phrases that made my heart race. Miranda's creative accounting, misappropriated foundation funds, threatened to expose me if I went public. One entry from October 1992 stood out, the ink pressed deeper into the page as if written with contained fury. The audit confirmed what I suspected. Miranda has been siphoning money from the Children's Wing Fund for years, nearly $2.3 million, diverted to administrative costs that seemed to coincide perfectly with her renovation of the Newport house and Vivian's private school tuition. When confronted, she didn't deny it. She simply said, "Mother, surely you understand that maintaining our position requires resources. The hospital will get its wings eventually." As if stealing from sick children were merely a timing issue. "Harold is devastated. He's threatening to leave if I don't cover it up. Think of the family name," he kept saying, "as if our name means anything if we betray everything it should stand for." My hands shook as I turned to the next page. "Harold left today. He says he can't bear the scandal if it becomes public. I've used my personal inheritance to replace the missing funds, but I've insisted on Miranda's removal from the foundation board. She'll never forgive me for that public humiliation, but I couldn't allow her to continue. The children's wing will be built as promised, though no one will ever know the real cost." I sat back, stunned. This wasn't the family history I'd been told. My mother had always portrayed my grandfather's departure as Eleonora's fault, claiming her obsession with her medical career had driven him away. Now I understood Vivian's cryptic reference to 1992 and why my mother had spent decades trying to rehabilitate the family's social standing. I opened the manila envelope next. Inside were bank statements, photocopied checks with my mother's signature, and what appeared to be internal foundation audit documents, all meticulously organized and annotated in my grandmother's handwriting. She had kept the evidence, even after covering up the scandal. The photographs showed happier times, my grandparents on their wedding day in 1958, Eleonora radiant in the very dress I now sought. In the image, she stood proudly beside my grandfather, the intricate lace bodice and sweeping satin skirt capturing the elegance of the era, but with a simplicity that defied the usual ostentation of Newport society. Finally, I opened the velvet pouch and gasped. Inside was a delicate diamond and sapphire brooch in the shape of a forget-me-not flower. I recognized it instantly from the wedding photo. It had been pinned to the bodice of grandmother's dress. Attached to the brooch was a small card with grandmother's handwriting, for Eliza to wear on her wedding day. The dress and the brooch belonged together, just as truth and legacy should never be separated. One without the other leaves the story incomplete. Tears filled my eyes as I traced the delicate petals with my fingertip. This brooch had been meant to accompany her dress, the dress my mother and sister were now keeping from me. But why? What threat could an old wedding dress possibly pose, unless— I returned to the journal, flipping ahead to the final entries before grandmother's death. There, in an entry dated just 3 weeks before she passed away, I found my answer. Miranda visited today, asking about my will. She seems particularly fixated on the wedding dress. I didn't tell her about the hidden pocket I sewed into the lining all those years ago, or about the letter inside that details everything from 1992. Some truths need to be preserved for the right moment. Eliza will find it when the time comes. She has her grandfather's moral compass and my stubborn persistence. The perfect combination for a truth keeper. My phone rang, startling me from my discovery. Richard's name flashed on the screen, finally returning my calls after days of silence. Eliza? Where are you? Your mother just called me, saying you're making a scene about some old dress. I stared at the journal in my hands, the weight of my grandmother's hidden truths pressing against my chest. Richard, I said slowly, I need to ask you something important. If you had to choose between your family's reputation and the truth, which would you choose? His hesitation told me everything I needed to know. That's a strange question. He finally said, some truths don't need to be dragged into the light if they only cause pain. Your mother seems to think you're working through some misplaced sentimentality about your grandmother. I closed my eyes, suddenly seeing with perfect clarity the choice before me. It's not sentimentality, Richard. It's integrity. And I need to know if you'll stand with me when things get difficult. The line went quiet, except for the sound of his breathing. Let's talk about this tomorrow when you're calmer. I'm sure we can find you a lovely designer dress that will make everyone happy. That's not an answer, I said softly. It's the only one I have right now. After we hung up, I gathered the journal, the documents, and the brooch, securing them in my bag. The cottage suddenly felt different. Not a museum to the past, but a launching point for what I needed to do next. As I locked the door behind me, the rain had stopped and slanting afternoon sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the churning ocean below the cliffs. Somewhere in Newport, my grandmother's wedding dress held the final piece of evidence about what my mother had done. And now I understood exactly why she and Vivian were so determined to keep it from me. It wasn't just a dress. It was the truth wrapped in lace and satin, a truth that could unravel everything my mother had built over the last 30 years. I drove straight from the cottage to the Thornhill estate, my grandmother's journal secure in my bag and determination burning in my chest. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns as I pulled into the circular driveway without bothering to hide my presence. This time I walked straight to the front door and rang the bell. Harkins, our longtime butler, opened the door with practiced neutrality that flickered momentarily when he saw me. Miss Eliza, we weren't expecting you. Is my mother home? I asked, already stepping past him into the marble foyer. In the library with Mrs. Vivian, he replied, a note of hesitation in his voice. They've asked not to be disturbed. Perhaps if you'd like to wait. Thank you, Harkins, but this can't wait. I moved with purpose through the house, the click of my heels on marble echoing my heartbeat. I found them exactly as Harkins had said, my mother seated in her favorite wingback chair, reviewing what appeared to be foundation documents, while Vivian lounged on the leather sofa, scrolling through her phone. They both looked up when I entered, surprise quickly masked by practiced composure. Eliza, my mother said, setting aside her reading glasses. This is unexpected. I thought we'd concluded our discussion about the wedding plans. We did, I replied, remaining standing. This is about grandmother's wedding dress and the foundation audit of 1992. The silence that fell was absolute. Vivian's phone slipped from her fingers onto the sofa cushion. My mother's face went completely still, only the slightest whitening of her knuckles on the armrest betraying her shock. I don't know what you think you've discovered, she finally said, her voice steady but chilled, but I can assure you that your grandmother's selective memories in her final years were documented in her journal, I interrupted, pulling the leather-bound book from my bag, along with copies of bank statements, foundation documents, and a detailed account of how you embezzled over $2 million from the Children's Wing Fund. Vivian stood up abruptly. "You've always been dramatic, Eliza, but this is beyond ridiculous." "Is it?" I opened the journal to the marked page and began to read. "Miranda has been siphoning money from the Children's Wing Fund for years. Nearly $2.3 million diverted to administrative costs that seem to coincide perfectly with her renovation of the Newport house and Vivian's private school tuition." My mother rose slowly, like a glacier preparing to calve. "Give me that journal." "No," I said simply. "It's mine now, just like the cottage, just like the dress should be." "You have no idea what you're meddling with," my mother said, her voice low and dangerous. "Your grandmother made choices that protected this family, protected you, and now you want to undo all of that because of sentimentality over a dress?" "This isn't about sentimentality," I replied. "It's about honesty, about who we really are. Beneath all this." I gestured around at the library with its first editions and ancestral portraits. Grandmother built something real. She helped people. She stood for something. And you've spent your life covering up her real legacy while pretending to honor it. Vivian moved closer to our mother, the two of them presenting a united front. "And what exactly do you plan to do with this information?" she asked, her voice laced with challenge. "Destroy our family's reputation? Ruin the foundation standing in the community? All those charitable programs would collapse without the Thornhill name behind them. I don't want to destroy anything," I said. "I just want what's mine, what grandmother wanted me to have, the dress, with everything that's in it." My mother's eyes narrowed. "So that's it. You know about the letter?" "I do." "Then you understand why the dress had to be secured?" "Secured? Or destroyed?" I challenged myself. A flash of something, guilt perhaps, crossed my mother's face before her composure returned. "I did what was necessary to protect this family." "What did you do with it?" I demanded, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. My mother and Vivian exchanged a look I couldn't decipher. Then Vivian gave a slight nod, and my mother sighed. "It's being professionally cleaned," she said, "at Winslow's on Thames Street." The obvious lie hung in the air between us. Winslow's was Newport's premier textile conservator, but they didn't work with wedding dresses. They specialized in historical tapestries and museum pieces. "You're lying," I said quietly. "And we both know it." Vivian stepped forward, her face a mask of sisterly concern that didn't reach her eyes. "Eliza, you need to stop this crusade. Think about what you're risking, your relationship with Mother, with me, even with Richard." She lowered her voice. "I spoke with him earlier. He agrees you've become obsessed with this dress." My stomach twisted at this confirmation of Richard's betrayal, but I kept my expression neutral. "Is that why he suddenly stopped returning my calls until today? Because you got to him first?" "We simply expressed our concerns," my mother interjected smoothly. "As family does." "Family doesn't lie to each other," I countered. "Families don't steal from sick children. Family doesn't hide evidence of crimes." My mother's mask slipped for a moment, raw anger flashing in her eyes. "You ungrateful—" She caught herself, straightening her silk blouse with a practiced gesture. "You have no idea what I sacrificed to maintain this family's standing after your grandmother nearly destroyed everything. Do you think Newport society would have embraced you, accepted your little nursing career as charming rather than embarrassing, if I hadn't spent decades rebuilding our connections? Do you think the Hamiltons would look twice at you without the Thornhill name?" "Miranda," Vivian cautioned, casting a worried glance at me. "No, let her finish," I said, a strange calm settling over me. "I want to hear exactly what she thinks. she's given me. My mother stepped closer, her perfume, always the same exclusive French scent, enveloping me in memories of childhood reprimands and conditional approval. I gave you everything, she said, each word precisely enunciated. A flawless education, social connections that opened every door, the chance to marry into a family that will secure your position for life. And this is how you repay me? By digging up ancient history that helps no one? I looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. The perfect coiffure showed no hint of gray despite her 62 years. The expertly tailored clothing that shouted wealth while pretending to whisper it. The carefully maintained appearance of Newport aristocracy that had become so intrinsic to her identity that she could no longer separate herself from it. You didn't give me everything, I said quietly. You gave me the parts of yourself that you approved of. The rest, the parts that might have made me happy rather than perfect, you tried to prune away like one of your topiary shrubs. I turned to Vivian, whose expression had grown uncertain. And you had a choice. You still do. Something flickered in my sister's eyes, a moment of vulnerability quickly suppressed. You don't understand what's at stake, she murmured. I understand. Perfectly, I replied. Now I'll ask one more time. Where is grandmother's dress? The grandfather clock in the corner ticked heavily into the silence. Finally, my mother spoke. It's gone, Eliza. I had it destroyed last week after Mrs. Chen told me you'd been asking. About it, my blood ran cold. You're lying. Am I? Her smile was glacial. Check the fire pit on the east terrace if you don't believe me. Some things are too dangerous to keep, even for sentiment's sake. My legs carried me through the house before my mind had fully processed her words. I burst onto the east terrace, the stone cold beneath my feet as I raced to the large copper fire pit where my mother often hosted evening cocktails in the summer. There, amid the ashes and half-burned logs, lay a charred scrap of fabric, delicate lace edging that I recognized instantly from the photographs. Beside it gleamed the tarnished remains of what must have been the dress's pearl buttons. A sound escaped me. Not quite a scream, not quite a sob, as I fell to my knees beside the fire pit. With shaking hands, I gathered the pitiful remains, the blackened lace crumbling between my fingers. Behind me, I heard my mother's measured footsteps. Now you understand, she said, no triumph in her voice, only cold certainty. Some legacies aren't worth preserving. I didn't turn to look at her. I couldn't. Instead, I carefully placed the dress remnants in my coat pocket and rose to my feet. You're wrong, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. And you've made a terrible mistake. As I walked past her toward the house, she caught my arm. Her fingers dug into my flesh, her voice lowered to ensure only I could hear. You will return your grandmother's journal and everything else you took from the cottage by tomorrow morning, or I will ensure the Hamiltons withdraw their blessing from this marriage. Richard's father is particularly concerned with scandal. As you know, I met her gaze, surprised to find no fear within myself anymore. You still don't understand, do you? You've already lost. You just don't know it yet. I pulled free from her grasp and walked away, the remnants of my grandmother's dress in my pocket, and the weight of her truth in my bag. Behind me, in the perfect house with its perfect garden, I left the shattered remains of the life I'd been trying to fit into for 28 years. It was time to build something new. The drive back to my apartment passed in a blur. Rain had started again, matching my mood as windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the deluge. My fingers kept straying to my coat pocket, touching the charred remnants of my grandmother's dress. All that remained of her final message. To me. My phone rang incessantly, first Richard, then Vivian, then my mother. I silenced each call, unable to form words for the betrayal that burned inside me. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex parking lot, darkness had fallen completely, the sodium lights casting sickly yellow pools across the asphalt. Sat in my car for long minutes, rain drumming on the roof, unable to summon the energy to move. Finally, a tap on my window startled me out of my daze. Richard stood there, rainwater streaming down his perfectly tailored overcoat, his expression a careful mask of concern. I rolled down the window a few inches. "What are you doing here?" "I was worried about you," he said, rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead. "Your mother called, said you were upset. Can I come in? We should talk." Against my better judgment, I nodded, gathering my bag with grandmother's journal and tucking the dress fragments deeper into my pocket before stepping out into the rain. We didn't speak as we climbed the 3 flights to my apartment. I could feel Richard's eyes on my back, assessing, calculating. It was a gaze I'd never noticed before today. Inside, I moved mechanically, flipping on lights, hanging my wet coat, watching water puddle on the hardwood floor beneath our feet. My small apartment, once a refuge from Newport's constant social obligations, suddenly felt like a cage. "Your mother is worried about you," Richard began, standing awkwardly in my living room, making no move to take off his wet coat. "She says you're fixating on old family matters that should stay buried." "Is that what she calls embezzlement and cover-ups?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Old family matters?" Richard sighed, running a hand through his damp hair. "Look, every old family has skeletons, Eliza. The Hamiltons certainly do. But dragging them into the light doesn't help anyone." "My mother burned my grandmother's wedding dress," I said flatly. "She destroyed it to keep me from finding what was hidden inside." "Because she's protecting the family legacy," he countered. "Your grandmother understood that too in the end. Why else would she have covered up the financial irregularities instead of reporting them?" I stared at him, truly seeing him for perhaps the first time in our 2-year relationship. The perfect political science degree from Yale, the carefully curated career in his father's investment firm. The way he always knew exactly what to order at every restaurant, which fork to use, which opinion to express in which company. "You knew," I said quietly, "about what my mother did." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Not the details. But in circles like ours, there are always whispers. Your mother and my father have known each other for decades, Eliza. They sit on many of the same boards. And you never thought to tell me? It wasn't my story to tell." He took a step toward me. "But now that you know, we can move forward. Together. Put all this behind us." I clutched my bag closer, feeling the hard outline of the journal inside. "And what about the truth? What about what was right and wrong?" Richard's expression hardened slightly. "The truth is whatever narrative serves the greater good. In this case, preserving the Thornhill Foundation's work, and by extension, your family's reputation." "The greater good," I repeated bitterly. "Tell that to the sick children who had to wait years for the hospital wing my grandmother promised them." "That was 30 years ago, Eliza. The wing was built. No lasting harm was done. Except for my grandfather, who left rather than face the Zhao scandal. Except for my grandmother, who spent the rest of her life covering for my mother's crimes." I shook my head. "And now, to me." Richard stepped closer, taking my hand in his. His palm felt cold and unfamiliar against mine. "I came here to help you. See the reason. Your mother is willing to forgive this episode if you return the journal and whatever else you took. We can proceed with the wedding as planned. The Hamilton name will give you protection that the Thornhill name alone can't provide anymore." The realization hit me like ice water. This isn't about caring for me at all, is it? This is damage control. His silence was answer enough. "Did my mother send you here to retrieve the journal?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Richard had the decency to look ashamed. "She's concerned about what you might do with it. In your emotional state." I pulled my hand from his sudden clarity washing over me. I'd like you to leave. Eliza, be reasonable. Now, Richard. He straightened, all pretense of tenderness vanishing. If you pursue this, you're not just damaging your mother's reputation, you're damaging your future, our future. The Hamiltons can't be associated with the kind of scandal this could create. Is that a threat? I asked quietly. It's reality, he replied. I love you, Eliza, but I have responsibilities to my family too. Then I'm making this easy for you, I said, pulling the 3-carat diamond engagement ring from my finger. You're free of those responsibilities, at least where I'm concerned. He stared at the ring I held out to him, genuinely shocked. You can't be serious. You're throwing away everything we've built because of an old dress and some financial indiscretions that happened before you were born. No, I said, feeling strangely calm. I'm choosing not to build a life on lies. There's a difference. He didn't take the ring. Instead, he headed for the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. You have until tomorrow to reconsider. After that, I can't guarantee my father won't take steps to protect our family's interests. Another threat, more thinly veiled this time. I said nothing, and after a moment he left. The click of the door closing behind him felt like the period at the end of a chapter. I sank onto my sofa, the enormity of what had just happened washing over me. In a single day, I'd lost my grandmother's dress, my fiancé, and any illusion about the family I'd been born into. My phone lit up with a text from my mother. Richard tells me you're being difficult. This is your final warning. Return what you took by 9 a.m. tomorrow or face the consequences. I didn't reply. Instead, I called the hospital where I worked and requested emergency personal leave. My supervisor, Dr. Jensen, didn't ask questions. She'd been a friend of my grandmother's and had always treated me with a kindness free from the calculations that defined most Newport relationships. Take whatever time you need, Eliza, she said warmly. Your patients will be here when you're ready to return. Next, I called the only friend I trusted completely. Maya Rahman, my roommate from nursing school who now worked as a public defender in Boston. If anyone would understand moral complexities and legal consequences, it would be her. I need advice, I said when she answered, and possibly a place to stay for a while. You have both, she replied without hesitation. What's happened? I gave her the condensed version, my voice breaking only when I described the burned dress. Those vindictive... Maya caught herself. Pack what you need and come to Boston tonight. My couch is yours for as long as you need it. I can't run away from this, I said, though the temptation to do exactly that was overwhelming. It's not running away, Maya countered. It's regrouping, strategic retreat, getting perspective away from people who are gaslighting you. She was right, of course. I thanked her and promised to text when I was on the road. After we hung up, I moved through my apartment with a new purpose, packing essentials into a single suitcase. Clothes, toiletries, my laptop, and most importantly, grandmother's journal and the brooch she'd left me. As I was zipping the suitcase, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Vivian standing alone in the hallway, her expression uncharacteristically uncertain. After a moment's hesitation, I opened the door but didn't invite her in. I didn't expect to see you here, I said. Vivian glanced nervously down the hallway. I don't have much time. Mother thinks I'm at the spa. What do you want? She thrust a small leather pouch toward me. I saved these. Before the dress was destroyed. Cautiously, I accepted the pouch and opened it. Inside lay several pearl buttons and a small square of lace that had been carefully cut from the dress, not burned or damaged. Why? I asked, genuinely confused. Vivian's carefully constructed facade cracked slightly. Because I'm not completely the person Mother made me. She hesitated. And because grandmother loved you more than she ever loved me. But she wasn't wrong to do so. Before I could respond, she turned and hurried down the hallway, her designer. heels clicking against the linoleum floor. I closed the door and leaned against it, clutching the small pouch of saved fragments. It wasn't the letter from the dress's hidden pocket, but it was something, a tiny act of rebellion from the sister I thought I'd lost completely to our mother's influence. I finished packing quickly after that, adding Vivian's gift to my suitcase. As I did a final sweep of my apartment, my gaze fell on the framed photo of grandmother and me that had sat on my bedside table for years. I carefully wrapped it in a sweater and added it to my bag. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. A strange calm settled over me as I loaded my suitcase into the trunk of my car. My apartment keys felt heavy in my hand. I wouldn't be returning to this place, at least not anytime soon. Whatever came next would require me to be beyond my mother's reach. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I noticed a black sedan idling across the street. One of the Thornhill family drivers, no doubt reporting my movements back to my mother. So be it. Let her know I was leaving. Let her think she'd won. But as I merged onto the highway heading north toward Boston, I made a silent promise to my grandmother and to myself. This wasn't over. The dress might be gone, but the truth it contained would find its way to light one way or another. I was a Thornhill after all, just not the kind my mother had tried to make me. Boston greeted me with a maze of one-way streets and impatient drivers, a world away from Newport's manicured order. By the time I navigated to Maya's building in Cambridge, a weathered brownstone with bicycles chained to every available railing, it was well past midnight. My eyes burned from fatigue and tears. I'd refused to shed. Maya was waiting at the door, her dark hair twisted into a messy bun, wearing sweatpants and a faded Harvard Law t-shirt, a deliberate rejection of the polished appearance she maintained in court. Without a word, she pulled me into a fierce hug, the kind that acknowledged the breaking without requiring me to explain it. "You look terrible," she said finally, taking my suitcase. But in a dignified, aristocratic way. I managed a weak smile. "Is that a compliment?" "From me?" "Always." She led me up 3 flights of creaking stairs to her apartment, cluttered with law books and colorful textiles from her Bangladeshi heritage, a space that felt alive and personal in a way the Thornhill estate never had. "The couch is yours. I changed the sheets and everything." The simple kindness nearly undid me. "Thank you," I whispered, afraid that saying more would crack the fragile composure I'd maintained during the 3-hour drive. "You. Want to talk about it now or in the morning?" she asked, putting on a kettle for tea. "Morning," I replied. "I can't process it all yet." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Fair, but I should warn you. Your phone has been blowing up for the past hour. I saw the notifications when you were bringing your bag up." I pulled my phone from my pocket, dreading what I would find. 23 missed calls and nearly 40 text messages, from Richard, from my mother, from Vivian, and most surprisingly, from several Newport acquaintances I barely spoke to. The most recent was from my mother's close friend, Barbara Wellington. "Darling, just heard the news. So sorry about the wedding. If you need anything at all?" "What news?" I murmured, scrolling frantically through the messages. Maya leaned over my shoulder, her expression darkening as she read. "Looks like they're getting ahead of the story. Classic damage control. Paint you as unstable before you can tell your version." The text from Richard confirmed it. "Your mother has announced our mutual decision to postpone the wedding indefinitely due to your health concerns. I hope you understand this is for the best. Please call me when you're thinking clearly." Again. A surge of rage burned through my exhaustion. "They're making it sound like I had some kind of breakdown." "Of course they are," Maya said matter-of-factly, handing me a mug of chamomile tea. "You threatened the narrative, so they're creating a new one where you're not credible. How can they just erase me like this?" My voice cracked despite my efforts to keep it steady. "How can they turn me into a footnote in my own life?" Maya sat beside me on the couch, her expression serious. Because they've had decades of practice maintaining their version of reality. But Eliza, she took my hand. They can only do that if you let them. I stared into my tea, watching the steam curl upward. The dress is gone. The letter that could have proven everything about my mother's embezzlement, it's ashes now. I reached into my bag and pulled out my grandmother's journal. All I have is this, and who's going to believe one old journal against the combined influence of the Thornhills and the Hamiltons? You'd be surprised, Maya said. Truth has a way of finding light. She hesitated. But first, you need sleep. Real decisions can't be made at 1 a.m. after the day you've had. She was right, of course. I let her lead me through the nighttime. Routine like I was a child. Setting out towels, showing me where the extra blankets were kept, making sure I had water by the couch. The simple acts of being cared for without expectation felt foreign after years of conditional Thornhill approval. When she finally left me alone, I lay awake staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, my mind racing despite my body's exhaustion. My phone continued to vibrate with messages I couldn't bear to read. Eventually, I silenced it completely and placed it face down on the coffee table. Only then, in the quiet darkness of Maya's living room, with no one to witness, did I allow myself to cry for the dress, for my grandmother's final message lost to flames, for the family I thought I had, for the life I'd been building on a foundation of lies. When morning came, harsh sunlight streaming through windows without the filtering of Newport's tasteful drapes, I woke to find my bank account frozen and my credit cards declined. The email from my bank was apologetic, but firm. Due to concerns of identity theft raised by your co-account holder, we've temporarily suspended access to your accounts. Pending verification. My co-account holder. My mother. Of course. I stared at my laptop screen, a hollow feeling spreading in my chest. This wasn't just pettiness. This was strategic. Without access to money, I couldn't hire a lawyer, couldn't move forward with any investigation into the foundation, couldn't even pay for a hotel if Maya's hospitality ran out. They're trying to starve you out, Maya said when she emerged from her bedroom, taking one look at my expression and the laptop screen. Classic abuser. Tactic? Financial control? I have maybe $200 in cash, I said numbly, and whatever I can get for this. I twisted the engagement ring still clutched in my palm, the ring Richard had been too shocked to take back. Maya's eyes narrowed. Don't sell that yet. It's leverage. And you're a nurse with a spotless employment record. You have options beyond Thornhill money. But when I called the hospital later that morning, Dr. Jensen's usual warmth had cooled to professional politeness. I'm sorry, Eliza, but the board has concerns about your personal leave request. It seems there are questions about your current state. What questions? I asked, my stomach nodding. Who on the board raised concerns? There was a pause. I shouldn't say, but you deserve to know. Richard Hamilton Sr. called an emergency meeting yesterday evening. Your position is secure, but your leave request has been denied. Richard's father. The hospital board chairman. Another door closed. I see, I managed to say. Thank you for telling me. After hanging up, I sat at Maya's kitchen table, surrounded by the breakfast dishes she'd left before rushing to court. Isolation closed in around me like the walls of a cell. No money, no job security, no family, no fiancé. Just as my mother had calculated. My phone buzzed with yet another text, this time from a blocked number. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. You have until 5 p.m. to return the journal and documents. After that, your grandmother's cottage goes on the market. Your choice. They couldn't sell the cottage. Grandmother had left it to me specifically in her will, separate from the Thornhill estate. But with enough lawyers, enough money, enough pressure on the executor, I called the only person who might know if this threat was real, Mrs. Chen. She answered on the first ring, her voice hushed. Miss Eliza, are you safe? the concern in her voice nearly broke me again. "I'm safe, Mrs. Chen, but they're threatening to sell the cottage. Can they do that?" A pause. "Your mother has been meeting with lawyers since yesterday. Mr. Garrett, the estate executor, was summoned this morning." Another pause, longer this time. "There's something else. Men came to the cottage last night. They took boxes of documents, and they changed the locks. My last sanctuary. Gone. Mrs. Chen, I need to know, did you see what happened to the dress? Was there anything inside it before they burned it?" I held my breath, hoping against hope. "I don't know about inside," she said carefully. "But Miss Vivian took something before they burned it. A small piece of the lace trim, I think." "She gave it to me," I said. "But there was supposed to be a letter hidden in the lining." "The lining?" Mrs. Chen's voice grew distant, as if remembering. "Your mother cut it open first. She took something out. An envelope, I think. But then Mr. Harkins called her away. She gave the dress to Miss Vivian to finish the job." My heart pounded. So the letter might still exist? My mother might have it? Possibly, but Miss Eliza... Mrs. Chen's voice dropped even lower. "Be careful. Your mother is very afraid right now, and afraid people do desperate things." After we hung up, I sat in Maya's quiet apartment, sunlight streaming through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like the pieces of my shattered life. Everything I'd counted on, family, career, future, had been stripped away in less than 24 hours. But amid the wreckage, a flicker of hope sparked. The letter might still exist. My mother had removed it before burning the dress. And if she'd kept it rather than destroying it, there must be a reason. My phone buzzed again with another message from my mother. "The movers will be at your apartment tomorrow. Since you've abandoned it, we've arranged for your things to be placed in storage. The lease has been terminated." The noose tightened further. No money, no job security, no home to return to. I picked up my grandmother's journal, running my fingers over the worn leather cover. In its pages lay the truth, but without the letter from the dress, the final proof, it might not be enough. For the first time since this began, I felt truly alone. The Thornhill machine was powerful, ruthlessly efficient, and I was just one person with dwindling resources and fewer allies by the hour. I looked at the remnants of the wedding dress Vivian had saved, laid out on Maya's coffee table like artifacts from a distant civilization, the delicate pearls, the yellowed lace, the whispered promise of a grandmother to her granddaughter. "I don't know if I can win this," I said to the empty apartment, to the dress fragments, to my grandmother's memory. The silence that answered felt like surrender. And then my phone rang again, an unknown number. I answered without thinking, desperate for any connection that wasn't threatening or dismissive. "Eliza Thornhill?" A woman's voice, unfamiliar but authoritative. "Yes," I answered cautiously. "My name is Catherine Blackwood. I was your grandmother's attorney for over 30 years. A pause. "And I think it's time we talked about the other letter she left, the one that wasn't in the dress." Catherine Blackwood's office occupied the top floor of a brownstone in Boston's Back Bay, a discreet brass plaque the only indication of the legal power housed within. The receptionist, a silver-haired woman who looked like she could keep secrets buried for centuries, led me to a corner office overlooking the Charles River. I'd expected someone severe, someone who matched the granite-like authority in her voice. Instead, Catherine Blackwood stood to greet me with unexpected warmth. A tall black woman in her 60s with close-cropped silver hair, wearing a charcoal suit that managed to look both imposing and elegant. Her handshake was firm, her eyes keenly assessing. "You look like Eleonora," she said without preamble. "Same determined chin." "You knew my grandmother well?" I asked, taking the seat she offered. A hint of a smile touched her lips. 30 years of friendship disguised as a professional relationship. Eleanora Thornhill was not a woman who trusted easily, but when she did, she shook her head. Fierce loyalty, which is why we're here today. I clutched my handbag closer, feeling the outline of grandmother's journal inside. On the phone, you mentioned another letter. She nodded, moving to a wall safe hidden behind an abstract painting. Eleanora knew your mother would try to destroy the letter in the dress. Miranda is nothing if not predictable in her self-preservation. The safe opened with a soft click. So she created a contingency plan. From the safe, Catherine removed a sealed envelope, yellowed with age, and placed it on the desk between us. My grandmother's handwriting was unmistakable on the front, to be opened only in the event that the dress is compromised. How did you know? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Chen called me yesterday, said you might need this. She slid the envelope toward me. Eleanora arranged for several people to act as sentinels. Mrs. Chen, myself, Dr. Jensen at the hospital. We were to watch and wait, and if certain events occurred, to make contact. Dr. Jensen? I frowned. But she just denied my leave request. She seemed to be siding with the Hamiltons. Catherine's expression softened. A necessary deception. She needed to maintain access. Trust me, Emily Jensen is very much on your side. She was your grandmother's closest friend during the 1992 crisis. The mention of 1992 sent a chill through me. I stared at the envelope, both hungry for its contents and afraid of what I might find. Before you open it, Catherine said, her voice gentle but firm, you should know what you're up against. Your mother has filed a petition to have you declared mentally incompetent, claiming you're suffering from paranoid delusions about family conspiracies. She's seeking temporary guardianship. The room seemed to tilt sideways. She can't do that. I'm a fully functioning adult with a medical career. She can try, Catherine replied. And with the Hamiltons' backing, she might succeed, at least temporarily. Enough to seize control of your assets, including the cottage. Why go to such extremes? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Because you're threatening something more valuable than money. You're threatening the myth they've built. Catherine leaned forward. The Thornhill Foundation isn't just a charity. It's the pillar on which Newport society rests. If your mother's embezzlement became public, dozens of other powerful families would be implicated. The Hamiltons chief among them. My hands trembled as I picked up the sealed envelope. So it wasn't just my mother. It was a whole network. Your grandmother discovered that much too late, Catherine confirmed. By then, the only option was containment. I broke the seal and carefully unfolded the letter inside, the paper crackling with age. As I read, my grandmother's voice seemed to fill the room. My dearest Eliza, if you're reading this, then the dress has been compromised, as I feared it might. Miranda has always been terrified of truth. She sees it as a weapon rather than a liberator. What I couldn't tell you in life, I must tell you now. The embezzlement was far more extensive than I initially believed. When I confronted Miranda in 1992, I thought she had acted alone. I was wrong. The money wasn't just funding her lifestyle, it was paying off a collective debt. A terrible mistake made by several families, including the Hamiltons. In 1985, a clinical trial for an experimental cancer drug was conducted at Thornhill Memorial Hospital. The trial records were falsified to show success when there was none. 12 patients died as a result, deaths that were covered up and attributed to the progression of their disease. The families were paid for their silence with foundation money. Your grandfather couldn't bear the knowledge when he discovered it. His subsequent abandonment was in reality a suicide, carefully disguised as a sailing accident to protect the family name. Miranda knew this, yet let me shoulder the blame for his departure rather than face the truth of what her actions had wrought. I've spent my life making amends in the only way I could, by ensuring the foundation funds actually reached those in need, by becoming the doctor I should have been from the start. But atonement is not enough without truth. Enclosed with this letter is a key to a safe deposit box at First National Bank of Boston, box number 1847. Inside you will find all the evidence I've collected, the clinical trial records, the death certificates, the falsified research papers, and most importantly, the recording of the meeting where the cover-up was orchestrated. The choice of what to do with this information is yours. But know this: whatever you decide, you are not alone. There are others who have waited for the truth as long as I have. People whose loved ones were sacrificed for reputation and profit. Trust Catherine. Trust Emily Jensen. And perhaps most surprisingly, trust Vivian. In her heart, she knows what's right, even if she lacks the courage to act on it alone. Remember what I told you as a child: dignity doesn't shout, it endures. Your dignity is not in the Thornhill name, but in what you choose to do with the truth you now hold. With all my love and faith in you, Grandma Eleonora, I looked up, eyes burning with unshed tears. There was a cover-up. People died. Catherine nodded grimly. 12 people. I represented 2 of the families who tried to sue, before they were paid to drop their cases. Her expression darkened. That's when Eleonora brought me in as her personal counsel. She needed someone outside the Newport circle. And Dr. Jensen? She was a resident physician at the time, assigned to the trial but kept in the dark about the falsified data. When patients started dying unexpectedly, she raised concerns. They were ignored. I carefully folded the letter, my mind racing. The safe deposit box. I have a car waiting downstairs, Catherine said. The bank closes at 5. As we rode to the bank in Catherine's sleek black sedan, I stared out at Boston's gleaming towers, so different from Newport's old money insularity. Why didn't my grandmother expose all this while she was alive? She had the evidence. Catherine's eyes remained on the road. Because exposing it would have destroyed the foundation itself, and all the genuine good it had done since. She was trying to find a way to hold the guilty accountable without punishing those who relied on Thornhill funding. Cancer research, children's health initiatives, rural medical access, all would have collapsed in the scandal. And now that burden falls to me? I said quietly. Yes. No sugarcoating, no false comfort. I appreciated her honesty. But you don't have to carry it alone. At the bank, the manager escorted us to the vault with the deference reserved for longtime clients of Catherine's caliber. The safe deposit box was larger than I expected, the size of a small suitcase. Inside, meticulously organized and labeled, lay the evidence of a conspiracy spanning decades: medical records, financial documents, photographs, and most chillingly, a small tape recorder with a cassette inside. Is this the recording she mentioned? I asked, lifting it carefully. Catherine nodded. From the emergency meeting called when the trial results couldn't be hidden any longer. Your mother is on it. So is Richard Hamilton Sr. and 8 other prominent Newport families. I slipped the tape recorder into my bag along with the most critical documents. I need to hear it. Not here, Catherine cautioned. Somewhere private. And you need legal protection before you decide what to do next. She handed me a business card. This is Julian Martinez. He specializes in whistleblower cases. If you decide to go public, you'll need him. As we left the bank, my phone buzzed, with a text from Maya. SOS. Someone claiming to be from social services just came to the apartment looking for you. Said they had commitment papers. I didn't tell them where you are, but they're escalating fast. Cold fear washed over me. They're trying to have me committed now, not just declared incompetent. Catherine's expression hardened. Then we need to move quickly. You can't go back to Maya's apartment. She made a swift decision. You'll come. To my house. I have a guest suite where you'll be safe while we plan our next steps. In the car, I texted Maya that I was safe and would contact her later. Then, with shaking hands, I called the one person I never expected to reach out to again. Vivian. She answered immediately. Eliza? Where are you? Mother has half of Newport looking for you. I know about the clinical trial, I said without preamble. I know about grandfather's suicide. I have the evidence grandmother collected. The silence that followed stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, what are you going to do? I haven't decided yet, but grandmother's letter said I could trust you. Was she wrong? Another long pause. Then, so softly I could barely hear, no, she wasn't wrong. What do you need from me? Information. What's happening at the house? What's Mother planning? Vivian's voice steadied. She's frantic. I've never seen her like this. She's called in every favor, every connection. The commitment papers were her idea. Richard's father made the arrangements through a judge who owes him. They're saying you stole family heirlooms, that you're delusional about some conspiracy. A beat. They're planning to release a statement tomorrow about your history of mental instability, complete with manufactured evidence. And you're going along with this? I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. I was. Her voice cracked slightly. Until I found grandfather's real suicide note yesterday. Mother kept it in her personal safe all these years. That's when I knew everything you were saying might be true. Hope flickered unexpectedly. Do you still have it? Yes. And something else. The letter from the dress. Mother didn't destroy it. She's keeping it in the same safe. My heart raced. Vivian, I need those documents. I know. She took a deep breath. Meet me tomorrow. The old boathouse at Satchwest Point. 7 a.m. I'll bring what I can. After we hung up, I looked at Catherine, who had heard my side of the conversation. Can we trust her? I asked. Your grandmother seemed to think so, she replied carefully. But people under pressure make unpredictable choices. We should be prepared for all possibilities. That night, in the elegant guest suite of Catherine's Beacon Hill home, I laid out the fragments of truth I'd collected. Grandmother's journal, the documents from the safe deposit box, the fragments of the dress Vivian had saved, pieces of a puzzle that revealed a picture far darker than I'd imagined when this began. I played the cassette tape on an old player Catherine had found in her attic. The voices from the past filled the room, tense, calculating, arranging the cover-up of deaths they had caused through negligence and greed. My mother's voice, younger but unmistakable, suggests ways to manage the narrative. Richard's father proposed the payoffs. A chorus of Newport's elite agreeing to bury the truth to protect their investments. And in the background, almost too faint to hear, my grandfather's voice, the only dissenter, asking about the families, about justice, about the oath they had, all taken as medical professionals to do no harm. I sat in silence long after the tape ended, the weight of responsibility settling onto my shoulders. Tomorrow, I will meet Vivienne. Tomorrow, I would have to decide whether to expose decades of lies and potentially destroy the foundation my grandmother had built, or find another way to honor both truth and legacy. Tomorrow, I would truly become my grandmother's heir, not through a dress, but through the choices I would make in her name. Dawn broke over Boston Harbor in shades of lavender and gold, but I'd been awake for hours, rehearsing what I would say to Vivian. Catherine insisted on driving me to Newport, her concerns about my safety overriding any protests. If this is a trap, she said as we crossed the Rhode Island state line, we need an exit strategy. And if it's not, I asked, watching the familiar coastline emerge through morning mist, then we need to be ready for whatever your sister brings. She glanced at me. Have you decided what you'll do with the evidence? If Vivian delivers what she promised? I stared at the passing landscape, so familiar, yet suddenly foreign. I keep thinking about what grandmother wrote, about finding a way to hold the guilty accountable without destroying all the good the foundation has done. A delicate balance, Catherine murmured. Maybe impossible, I admitted. But I have to try. Southwest Point stretched into the Atlantic like a finger pointing accusingly at the horizon. The old boathouse, a weathered structure where generations of Thornhill children had learned to sail, stood isolated at the end of a narrow path. No other cars were visible when we pulled into the small gravel lot. I should go alone from here, I said, checking my watch. 6:52 a.m., Catherine frowned. I don't like it. Vivian won't talk if she sees you. She's skittish enough already. I touched her hand briefly. Stay here. If I'm not back in 30 minutes, call that whistleblower attorney. The walk to the boathouse felt like crossing a threshold, leaving behind the person I had been just 3 days ago, moving toward someone I didn't yet recognize. The morning air smelled of salt and seaweed, the rhythmic crash of waves against rocks keeping time with my heartbeat. The boathouse door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, morning light filtered through grimy windows, illuminating dust motes and forgotten sailing equipment. And there, sitting on an overturned rowboat, was Vivienne. She looked different somehow, stripped of the armor of designer clothes and perfect makeup that usually defined her. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face bare, wearing jeans and a sweater I didn't recognize. She looked younger, vulnerable. You came alone? She asked, eyes darting past me to the door. Catherine Blackwood drove me. She's waiting in the car. I stayed near the entrance, uncertain. Did you bring the documents? Vivian reached into her messenger bag and pulled out a manila envelope. Mother's handwriting is on the outside. From when she stored them. She held it out to me, her hand trembling slightly. I had to drug her tea to get into the safe. She'll know it was me as soon as she wakes up. I took the envelope, my fingers brushing hers. The first contact between us in what felt like years. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Her voice was tight. Read it first. Inside the envelope were 2 items. A yellowed piece of stationery with our grandfather's distinctive handwriting, and a sealed envelope that had been slit open along the top, the letter from grandmother's dress. I read my grandfather's suicide. Note first, my throat constricting as his words flowed across the page. My dearest Eleonora, by the time you read this, I will have joined those 12 souls whose passage I failed to honor. I cannot continue to live in a world where our name, the name I once wore with such pride, has become synonymous in my own mind with such profound betrayal of our oath. Miranda believes that sacrificing a few for the greater good is acceptable, that the end justifies any means. Perhaps it is my failure as a father that she cannot see how this corrupts everything it touches. The money, the prestige, the social standing. None of it matters if obtained through the suffering of others. I have tried and failed to make her understand. Now I leave you with this burden, knowing you alone have the strength to bear it. Forgive me for this final weakness. I go not out of cowardice, but because I cannot face the families of those we betrayed. Tell the children I loved them, even as I failed them. Harold I looked up, tears blurring my vision. He killed himself because of what they did, and my mother let you and me believe he abandoned us. Vivian's face was pale. Read the other one. With shaking hands, I removed the second letter from the envelope, recognizing my grandmother's neat script. My dearest Eliza, if you are reading this, you have found your way to the dress, just as I knew you would. You were always the seeker of truth in our family. Even as a child, you would ask the questions others avoided. The documents in the Boston safe deposit box, Catherine has the key, will tell you much of what happened, but not all. The final piece is this. Your mother was not merely complicit in the cover-up, she was instrumental in falsifying the trial data. As a young researcher, newly graduated and eager to please her father, she altered results to show efficacy where there was none. When patients began dying, it was she who suggested silencing the families with foundation money. When your grandfather discovered what she had done, he confronted her. And then me. He could not live with the knowledge that his own daughter had betrayed everything he stood for. I have spent decades trying to atone for our failure to stop this, for my failure to see what was happening until it was too late. The Foundation's work since has saved countless lives, funded research that has led to genuine medical breakthroughs. This does not erase our sin, but perhaps it has begun to balance the scales. You stand now at the same crossroads I faced 30 years ago. Expose everything, and the Foundation falls, along with all the good it has done and could still do. Remain silent, and you become complicit in the ongoing deception. But there is a third path, one I did not have the courage to take. The evidence you now hold is enough to remove your mother and her conspirators from control without necessarily destroying the Foundation itself. A restructuring. A reckoning that preserves the mission while excising the corruption. Whatever you choose, know that I have always seen your true heart, Eliza. Not the perfect Thornhill daughter your mother tried to mold, but the compassionate healer you have become in spite of her. The dress was never just a dress. It was a symbol of choice. The choice I made to marry into this family. The choices I made to protect it. And now the choice you must make about its future. Choose wisely, my darling. Choose with both justice and mercy in your heart. All my love. Grandma Eleonora, I read the letter twice, then carefully folded it and placed it back in the envelope along with my grandfather's note. "What are you going to do?" Vivian asked, her voice small. What grandmother couldn't. I met my sister's eyes. "Remove Mother from the Foundation without destroying it, but I'll need your help." She stared at me, uncertainty written across her. "So why would you trust me, after everything?" "Because grandmother did. And because right now, you're sitting in this boathouse instead of standing beside Mother." I took a step closer. "Why did you come, Viv?" "Really?" Her composure cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Because I'm tired. So tired of being what she made me. Of knowing, somewhere deep down, that everything we have is built on other people's pain." She wiped angrily at her tears. "And because I remembered who I used to be. Before I learned that the only way to survive Mother was to become her. The sister I'd thought lost forever was still there, buried beneath layers of Miranda Thornhill's careful molding. I reached out and took her hand. Then help me. Help me find a way to make this right." She squeezed my hand, then pulled away abruptly, checking her watch. "We need to go. Now. Mother's alarm will go off soon, and when she finds the safe empty..." The boathouse door creaked behind me. I turned, expecting Catherine, but instead found myself staring at Richard. My stomach dropped. "I knew she'd crack eventually," he said, eyes fixed on Vivienne. "You never could keep a secret, could you?" "Richard," I started, instinctively moving to shield my sister. "Save it, Eliza." His voice was cold, professional. "This little crusade of yours ends now. My father's on the Foundation board too, remember? Did you really think we'd let you destroy everything our families have built?" Vivian stepped forward, surprising me. "It's not about destroying anything. It's about the truth." "The truth," he scoffed. "The truth is that 12 terminal cancer patients died 30 years ago. Tragic, but inevitable. The truth is that your family's foundation has saved thousands since then. The math isn't complicated. It is when the deaths were covered up," I countered. "When families were paid off, when research was falsified. Richard's expression darkened. You have no idea the good that comes from maintaining order, Eliza. The donations that flow when people believe in institutions, the research that gets funded because of confidence in the system. So the end justifies the means? Just like my mother said when those patients died? His silence was answer enough. How did you find us? Vivian asked, fear edging her voice. A cold smile touched his lips. You really should change your phone password more often, Viv. It's been your birth year since college. He stepped further into the boathouse. Now let's discuss how this is going to end. You'll both return to Newport. Eliza will seek the mental health treatment she so clearly needs. The documents will be returned. And we'll all go back to our lives. And if we refuse, I asked, then things get unpleasant. The threat hung in the air. Your mother's petition for guardianship will be granted. You'll lose control of everything. Your finances, your medical decisions, your freedom to come and go as you please. Is that really what you want? A movement in the doorway caught my eye. Catherine stood there, phone in hand, recording. Actually, she said, her voice cutting through the tension, I think we have what we need, Mr. Hamilton. Richard whirled around. Who the hell are you? Catherine Blackwood, attorney at law. And you've just threatened my client while implicitly admitting knowledge of a conspiracy to cover up medical fraud and wrongful death. She smiled thinly. Not your finest moment. The blood drained from Richard's face. You're recording this? That's illegal. Rhode Island is a one-party consent state for recordings, Catherine replied smoothly. And Ms. Thornhill, both Ms. Thornhills in fact, have consented. Now, I suggest you leave before you dig yourself any deeper. For a moment, I thought he might lunge at Catherine. Then, with a look of pure hatred directed at me, he turned and stormed out. We need to move quickly, Catherine said, pocketing her phone. He'll warn your mother immediately. What's our next step? I asked, clutching the envelope of documents. The Foundation Board meeting, Vivian said suddenly. It's today at noon. All the key players will be there. Mother, Richard's father, everyone involved in the original cover-up. Catherine's eyes gleamed with strategic calculation. Perfect timing. But we'll need more than just documents to confront them effectively. What about the families? I asked, the idea forming as I spoke. The ones who lost loved ones in the trial, are any of them still around? 3 of the 12 families still live in the area, Catherine confirmed. I've stayed in touch with them over the years. Can you reach them? Today? She nodded, already dialing on her phone. What are you thinking? I looked at Vivienne, then back to Catherine. I'm thinking it's time for the Thornhill Foundation to face its ghosts, literally. For the first time since this began, I felt the weight on my shoulders shift, not disappearing, but becoming bearable. I had allies. I had evidence. And most importantly, I had a clear vision of what justice might look like. The dress was gone, burned to ashes by my mother's fear. But its purpose had been fulfilled. It had led me to the truth that had been waiting all these years to be discovered. Not just about my family's sins, but about my own capacity to face them. Vivian touched my arm, her eyes clearer than I'd seen them in years. The Thornhill women are gathering, she said with the ghost of a smile. Mother should be terrified. As we left the boathouse, 3 abreast with the morning sun at our backs, I felt my grandmother's presence, not as a ghost, but as a witness. The truth had found its keeper at last. The hours between the boathouse and the Foundation Board meeting passed in a whirlwind of strategic planning. Catherine's elegant townhouse became our war room, with Vivian, Dr. Jensen, and Julian Martinez, the whistleblower attorney Catherine had recommended, gathered around a dining table covered with documents and legal pads. The goal isn't scorched earth, I explained, studying their faces. It's strategic pruning, removing the corruption while preserving the Foundation's work. Julian, a sharp-eyed man in his 40s with salt and pepper stubble, nodded thoughtfully. We're talking about a controlled burn rather than a wildfire. Difficult, but possible. He tapped the stack of documents. These records give us leverage, but they're also a double-edged sword. Make them public and the foundation likely collapses under the scandal. Which is why we need to be surgical, Catherine agreed. The board has 15 members. Based on the evidence, at least 7 were directly involved in the cover-up, including Miranda and Richard Hamilton Sr. The other 8? Dr. Jensen asked. She was older than I remembered, but her eyes still held the same compassionate intelligence I'd always admired. Newer appointments, Vivian supplied. Mostly figureheads chosen for their deep pockets, not their actual involvement. They followed Mother's lead, but they weren't part of the original conspiracy. I spread out the photographs from the safe deposit box. So we isolate the guilty parties, force resignations, restructure the leadership. They won't resign willingly, Catherine cautioned. Not without significant pressure. That's where the families come in, I said quietly. At 11:30, Catherine's phone rang. After a brief conversation, she looked up at me. They're here. The 3 families who had lost loved ones in the falsified clinical trial waited in Catherine's living room. I entered alone, my heart pounding against my ribs. These were the people whose suffering had been buried beneath decades of Newport, luxury and philanthropic galas. Daniel Reyes, whose mother had died at 52. Sarah Calloway, who had lost her husband at 45. And most devastating of all, Elizabeth Wright, who had been only 8 when her father became one of the trial's casualties. Thank you for coming, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I know this opens old wounds. Daniel, now in his 60s with grief etched into the lines of his face, spoke first. Ms. Blackwood said you have evidence, real evidence of what they did to our families. I nodded, clutching the envelope of documents. I do, and I want to help you use it, not just for financial compensation, though you deserve that too, but for acknowledgement, for the truth to finally be recognized. Sarah, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, studied me with suspicious eyes. Why now? Why are you? You're one of them. I am, I admitted. But I'm also the granddaughter of Eleanora Thornhill, who spent the rest of her life trying to atone for what happened. And I'm a nurse who believes that healing can't happen without truth. I met each of their gazes in turn. I can't undo what was done to your loved ones, but I can help make sure it's not buried anymore. Elizabeth, now a middle-aged woman with her father's eyes staring out from photographs I'd seen in the records, picked up one of the documents on the coffee table. What exactly are you proposing? A controlled confrontation, I explained. Today, at the Foundation Board meeting, your presence, along with these records, will force them to acknowledge what happened without the option of further cover-ups. And then what? Daniel asked skeptically. Then we negotiate. Resignations from everyone involved in the original conspiracy, public acknowledgement of what happened, a memorial fund for the victims, and a restructured foundation led by people who weren't part of the cover-up. The 3 exchanged glances, decades of shared pain creating a wordless communication between them. Why should we trust you? Sarah finally asked. Your mother was at the heart of this. You shouldn't trust me, I said honestly. Not yet. I haven't earned it. But trust Catherine Blackwood, who's been keeping these records safe for 30 years. Trust that what I'm proposing gives you more power than going through years of court battles where their lawyers would bury you in paperwork and delays. I paused. And if you're not satisfied with how today unfolds, all of these documents are yours to take to the press or the authorities. After a tense discussion, they agreed. The plan was set in motion. At 20 minutes to noon, we arrived at the Thornhill Foundation headquarters, an imposing Greek Revival building overlooking Newport Harbor. The security guard recognized Vivian immediately, offering a deferential nod as our unlikely procession entered the lobby. "The board is already gathering," Vivian murmured, leading us toward the elevator. "Mother likes everyone seated at least 10 minutes before the official start time." My phone vibrated with a text from Maya. "News outlets received anonymous. Tips about breaking developments at today's Thornhill Foundation meeting. Reporters are already setting up outside." I showed the text to Catherine, who raised an eyebrow. "Not our doing. Someone else wants this public." "Richard," Vivian said with certainty. "Insurance. If it looks like he might go down, he'll want Mother to take the bulk of the blame in the public eye." The boardroom occupied the entire top floor, a vast space dominated by a massive mahogany table and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. As we entered, a dozen conversations abruptly ceased. Every head turned toward our group, expressions ranging from confusion to outright alarm. My mother sat at the head of the table, regal in a tailored navy suit, her composure intact despite what must have been a frantic morning discovering both Vivienne's betrayal and the missing documents. Only the whiteness of her knuckles as she gripped her pen betrayed her tension. Richard Hamilton Sr., a silver-haired version of his son with the same calculating eyes, occupied the chair to her right. 7 other board members I recognized. From the evidence set scattered around the table, all part of Newport's elite, all complicit in the decades-old cover-up. "Eliza," my mother said, her voice perfectly controlled, "this is a closed meeting, and you appear to have brought guests." Her gaze swept over Catherine, Julian, Dr. Jensen, and the 3 family members with barely disguised disdain. "Yes," I replied, moving to stand directly opposite her at the table's end. "I believe they all have relevant contributions to make to today's agenda." "There is no item on the agenda that would warrant—" "I'm adding one," I interrupted, placing my grandmother's journal on the table with deliberate care. "A long overdue discussion about the 1985 clinical trial, the falsified data, and the subsequent cover-up that has been funded by this foundation for over 3 decades. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of Richard Hamilton Sr.'s heavy breathing. Several board members exchanged alarmed glances. "Perhaps," my mother said with deadly calm, "we should clear the room of non-board members for this unexpected topic." "Perhaps," Catherine countered, stepping forward. "You should be aware that everything said in this room is being recorded, and that reporters are currently gathering outside based on tips they've received about today's meeting." She smiled thinly. "Transparency seems the wisest course now, don't you think?" My mother's eyes darted to Richard Hamilton Sr., whose face had gone an alarming shade of red. "What exactly is it you want, Eliza?" she asked, her voice lower now. "Dangerous." I placed the tape recorder on the table and pressed play. The voices from 1985 filled the room, younger versions of my mother, Richard's father, and several others around the table, calmly discussing how to silence grieving families and bury evidence of medical negligence. One by one, the board members' faces lost color as their own words condemned them. When I stopped the recording, I nodded to Daniel, Sarah, and Elizabeth, who stepped forward. "Allow me to introduce Daniel Reyes, Sarah Calloway, and Elizabeth Wright," I said into the silence. "They lost family members in that trial. They were paid for their silence, told their loved ones' deaths were inevitable progressions of their disease rather than the result of falsified research data." I met my mother's gaze directly. "They're here to witness what happens next." My mother's mask finally slipped, raw fury flashing in her eyes. "You have no idea what you're doing. The damage you'll cause—" "Actually," Julian interjected smoothly, opening his briefcase, "we've prepared a very detailed understanding of exactly what will happen next." He placed a document before my mother. "This is a proposed restructuring plan for the Thornhill Foundation. It includes the immediate resignation of all board members involved in the 1985 cover-up, the establishment of a Victims' Memorial Fund, a formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and a new leadership structure that preserves the Foundation's ongoing medical research programs. He placed another document beside it. And this is what we'll be releasing to the press in 1 hour if the first document isn't signed. Complete records of the falsified trial, the cover-up, the misappropriation of funds, and the subsequent decades of deception, including your grandfather's actual cause of death. Richard Hamilton Sr. slammed his hand on the table. This is blackmail. No, I replied calmly. This is accountability. You've had 30 years without it. That ends today. My mother's eyes, so like my own, searched my face for weakness, for hesitation. Finding none, she turned to the other board members. We can fight this. Collectively, we have the resources. Miranda, one of the older board members, interrupted, his voice weary. It's over. Look around. Even if we could legally fight it, and I'm not convinced we can, the publicity would destroy everything. At least this way, the Foundation continues. One by one, the other conspirators nodded, the calculation visible in their expressions. They were cutting their losses, as Newport Society had always done when threatened from within. My mother stood abruptly, turning to Vivian with cold fury. And you, my own daughter. Vivian, who had been silent until now, straightened her shoulders. I'm more my grandmother's granddaughter than I realized. She met our mother's gaze without flinching, and I won't live with this anymore. The next hour unfolded in a blur of signatures, legal discussions, and carefully worded statements. Prepared for the press, Julian and Catherine orchestrated every detail, while Dr. Jensen spoke quietly with the three families, offering the medical explanation of what had truly happened to their loved ones, the closure they had been denied for decades. When it was done, when the resignations had been signed and the restructuring plan approved by the remaining board members, my mother gathered her things with mechanical precision. As she passed me on her way out, she paused. You think you've won, she said, her voice for my ears alone. But you've simply ensured that your grandmother's precious foundation will live on without the Thornhill name at its helm. Was that worth destroying your family? I met her gaze steadily. The foundation was never about our name. It was about helping people, something you forgot long ago. I took a breath. And our family was destroyed the moment you decided that other people's lives were acceptable collateral damage for your ambitions. She flinched, almost imperceptibly. For a moment, just a moment, I glimpsed something like regret in her eyes. You really are your grandmother's heir, she said finally, neither compliment nor insult, simply observation. Yes, I agreed, just not in the way any of us expected. As she walked away, her perfect posture never faltering even in defeat, I felt no triumph, only the weight of responsibility for what would come next. The foundation would continue under new leadership. The families would receive acknowledgement and restitution. The truth so long buried would finally see light. It wasn't a perfect justice, nothing could be after so many years, but it was a beginning, a real one, built on truth rather than carefully maintained appearances. Outside, where reporters had gathered in growing numbers, Catherine squeezed my hand. Your grandmother would be proud, she said quietly. Beside me, Vivian nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. She would be, and so would grandfather. Together, we stepped out to face the cameras and microphones to tell a story that had waited 30 years to be told, not of a ruined wedding dress, but of the truth it had protected, and the healing that might finally begin. 1 year to the day after my mother burned my grandmother's wedding dress, I stood at the edge of the cliffs behind the cottage, watching seagulls dive into the churning Atlantic. A crisp autumn breeze carried the scent of salt and lavender, the latter from the garden Vivian had restored with meticulous care, following the faded notes in grandmother's gardening journal. Thought I'd find you out here, Catherine said, joining me at the cliff's edge. Her elegant frame was wrapped in a cashmere shawl against the October chill. Anniversaries have a way of pulling us to meaningful places. I nodded, my hand instinctively touching the forget-me-not brooch pinned to my sweater, the one salvaged piece of my grandmother's wedding ensemble that had survived intact. I've been thinking about how much has changed in just 12 months. And everything had changed. The Thornhill Foundation had been restructured under new leadership, with the old guard removed and transparency measures implemented that would have made my grandmother proud. The Victims' Memorial Fund had awarded its first grants to medical ethics research. My mother had retreated to Arizona, building a new life far from Newport's judgment. "Dr. Patterson asked about you yesterday," Catherine said, a hint of amusement in her voice. "I believe that's the third time this month." I felt a blush warm my cheeks despite the brisk wind. James Patterson, the new head of oncology research at Newport Memorial, had been a surprisingly gentle presence during my transition to director of nursing at the hospital's pediatric wing. "We're having dinner next weekend," I admitted. "Just colleagues discussing the new research protocols." "Of course," Catherine replied, her knowing smile suggesting she didn't believe that for a moment. We walked back toward the cottage, where preparations for tonight's small gathering were underway. Through the kitchen window, I could see Maya, arranging flowers while Vivian checked something in the oven. One unexpected gift from the turmoil of last year had been this found family, women who had stood beside me through the darkness and remained for the light that followed. "Have you decided what you'll say tonight?" Catherine asked as we approached the porch. Tonight marked the official announcement of the Eleanora Thornhill Scholarship for Ethics in Medicine, funded by the proceeds from selling my engagement ring, and matched by several anonymous donors. The first recipient would be announced at the small ceremony in the cottage garden. "I've been working on it," I said. "It's harder than I expected to find the right words." Inside, the cottage hummed with quiet activity. What had once felt like a mausoleum to my grandmother's memory had transformed into a vibrant home. New furniture mingled with cherished antiques. Fresh paint brightened the walls. Photographs, both old and new, told the story of a family finding its way back to truth. The display case in the entryway remained, holding the fragments of the wedding dress Vivienne had rescued, alongside photographs of grandmother in her prime. But it no longer felt like a shrine to what was lost. Instead, it served as a reminder of what had been found in the ashes. "Package came for you," Maya called from the kitchen. "From Arizona." My mother's handwriting was unmistakable on the brown paper package. Inside lay a small wooden box I'd never seen before, delicately carved with forget-me-nots around the edges. A note accompanied it. "Eliza, I found this among your grandfather's things when I was cleaning out the storage unit. I believe it was meant for you all along. Some legacies take time to find their way home. Mother." The box contained a set of surgical instruments, clearly antique but lovingly maintained. Engraved on each was my grandfather's initials, and beneath them, a message. "Truth heals what silence breaks." "She's trying," Vivian said quietly, appearing at my shoulder. Her relationship with our mother had begun to mend, slowly, cautiously, but with genuine effort on both sides. In her own way. "I know," I replied, carefully returning the instruments to their velvet-lined case. Another piece of truth restored, another fragment of legacy reclaimed. As evening approached, guests began to arrive: Dr. Jensen, Daniel Reyes and his family, Julian Martinez, the scholarship committee, and a handful of others who had become part of our extended circle. We gathered in the garden, where white lights twinkled in the lavender bushes, and the sound of waves provided a gentle backdrop. When it came time for my speech, I stood beside the newest addition to the garden, a small stone bench engraved with the names of the 12 patients whose deaths had been covered up decades ago. Their families had chosen the inscription, "In remembrance, in warning, in hope." "A year ago," I began, "I stood in my mother's living room, asking for a wedding dress that had been promised to me. I couldn't have imagined then where that simple request would lead, what truths would be revealed, what legacies would be reclaimed. Faces turned toward me, illuminated by soft lantern light. Vivian's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Catherine's expression held quiet pride. Maya gave an encouraging nod. My grandmother, Eleonora Thornhill, believed that healing required truth, in medicine and in life. The dress she left me was destroyed, but the message hidden within it survived. That message taught me that what we inherit isn't always what we expect, and what we become isn't determined by our name, but by the choices we make in difficult moments. I gestured to the envelope containing the name of the scholarship recipient. Tonight, we honor not just my grandmother's memory, but the principles she lived by, even when it cost her dearly, that integrity matters more than appearance, that truth matters more than comfort, that facing our failings is the only path to genuine healing. As I announced the recipient, a promising young medical student dedicated to ethics reform in clinical trials, I felt a sense of completion. Not an ending, but a circle closing, making way for new beginnings. Later, after the guests had departed, and the cottage had quieted, I sat alone in my grandmother's study, now my study, and opened the journal where I'd been recording this journey since it began. I wrote about the evening, about the mother-of-pearl surgical instruments, about the scholarship recipient's shocked joy, about Vivian's quiet strength, and Catherine's unwavering guidance. I wrote about the possibility of new love, unexpected but welcome, with a man who valued truth as much as I had learned to. And then I added, the dress is gone, burned to ashes by fear of what it contained. But the truth isn't so easily destroyed. It waits, patient as stone, for someone brave enough to uncover it. I came searching for a wedding gown, and found instead a different kind of inheritance, one that can't be burned or buried or hidden away. I found the courage to stand firmly, in difficult truths, to choose light over darkness even when light reveals painful realities. Grandmother knew what she was doing when she left me that dress. It was never about the lace or the pearls, or even the letter hidden in its folds. It was about leading me to the person I needed to become, someone who would look beyond appearances to the heart of things. That's a legacy that fits better than any dress ever could. I closed the journal and moved to the window, looking out at the moonlight silvering the waves. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to live the truth I had fought to uncover. The hospital committee meeting, the continued restructuring of the foundation, dinner with James, a tentative call to my mother, life, moving forward. Not perfect, not unmarked by the scars of the past, but authentic in a way it had never been before. Outside my window, the ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon, witness to generations of Thornhill women making their choices, some in fear, some in courage, all in hope. Now it would witness mine, choices made not from obligation or appearance, but from the freedom I had fought to claim. The wedding that never happened had given way to something far more valuable, a life built on truth, surrounded by people who valued it as much as I had learned to. I touched the brooch at my collar, feeling its delicate petals beneath my fingertips. Some treasures survive the fire. Some legacies transcend destruction. The dress was gone, but I remained, my grandmother's heir at last. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.